Well, thank you everyone for coming here. I'm just going to show a short video to start us off.
Balka be Balka, welcome in the language of the Yagara people. We acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara peoples as the First Nation owners of the lands of where QUT now stands. For thousands of years, the Turrbal and Yagara people have gathered along the banks of Maiwa, the Brisbane River, to share their knowledge and stories. We pay our respects to their elders, laws, customs, and creation spirits. We recognise that these lands where QUT now stands have always been places of teaching, researching, and learning. We acknowledge the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within our QUT community. From Moreton Bay, inland as far as the Great Dividing Range near Warwick and Toowoomba, as far north as the Caboolture River, including the lands around Brisbane City, Meanjin. Yura yura yinala, balka bi balka, nganguru nguru maramakoro nganya birali, nganya bayam. Welcome to the traditional country of the Turrbal and Yagara people.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I'm Professor Dan Angus. I'm Director of the Digital Media Research Centre here at QUT. I'm honoured to open this important event today, held in collaboration with the Centre for Justice. While I stand before you here today as a white, straight male, I'm acutely aware my role here is not to speak on behalf of the experiences that are at the heart of today's discussions, but rather to support and amplify the voices of those who live them. I'm acutely aware of the privileges that have shaped my own journey and continue to shape the institutions we navigate. Today, we gather to confront the stark reality that while progress has been made, our society remains deeply rooted in colonial systems that perpetuate inequality, marginalisation, and violence against queer communities. This symposium on queer justice is not just an academic exercise, it is a political imperative. We are here to interrogate the digital spaces where queer identities are often commodified, policed, or erased, and to challenge the systemic biases that infiltrate our technologies, our media, and our policies. In a world where the right to simply exist as one's true self is still under siege, our work must be rooted in solidarity and action. It is not enough to be allies in name. We must leverage our platforms, our research, and our voices to dismantle the structures of oppression that queer individuals face daily. This is not just a conversation about inclusion today, it's about power. It's about recognizing that the fight for queer justice is inseparable from the broader struggle against all forms of discrimination, be it racism, sexism, or xenophobia. As we delve into the discussions today, let us remember that our commitment must be unwavering. The future we envision, one of true equality and justice, depends on the collective will to make it a reality. Thank you so much, everyone. And just on a personal note, I've just mentioned to a few of the panelists, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to stick around today because I've been triple booked, but look really forward to watching the video after it's produced. Just a personal thank you to the panelists for all your perspectives today, and I really look forward to listening to them after. Thank you, everyone here, for being in the audience. And again, a massive thank you to our colleagues at Centre for Justice for reaching out to the DMRC and really kind of extending the olive branch to do this. I think this is the first of many collaborations I see between the two centres in the near future, because I think the kinds of perspectives and the discussions happening today are things that will certainly continue and bear fruit in the coming years. So I'm going to hand over to Lucinda. Okay, I'll tag on to you then.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Yeah, so my name's Sarah. I'm actually the Centre Manager for Centre for Justice because unfortunately Rowena Maguire, our director, is unwell, so she can't be here today. So I can't follow your fantastic words there, Dan, but what I guess I really wanted to say is, and I know Rowena would want to say as well, is that we feel very privileged in Centre for Justice to be able to support the Queer Research Group and all of the amazing work that they're doing. you know, as a centre, we're really interdisciplinary, and I think that's going to be really reflected in the interesting and, you know, really diverse kind of speakers that we've got today. So similarly, thank you all for being here, and yeah, I'm going to pass on over now to Lucinda. So thank you very much, everyone.
Hi everyone, I'm Lucinda Nelson. I'm a PhD candidate at the DMRC, and I just wanted to start by giving a little bit of an overview about the Gender and Sexuality group at the DMRC. So this is a group that Zara and I started a couple of months back because we wanted to build a community of scholars focused on similar subject matter. So while the DMRC is amazing for the digital media part, we also wanted to give a little bit more attention to the queer and feminist parts of our work. So it's currently a group of 28 primarily early career researchers. At the moment, we've been meeting monthly to talk about current issues and updates in the field, to share our expertise in theory sessions, and to support each other in our research. But we're hoping to continue building the group to develop new research projects and build skills with a particular focus on advocacy and impact. As part of this new group, we've been thinking a lot about how we can make sure that the work that we do actually properly supports our communities. So we've put a few things in place today that we'd just like to share. The first thing is making sure that our unsalaried panel members today are being given a token of appreciation in the form of $100 gift vouchers to make sure that their time and labour is recognised here. And we also wanted to note that, oh yeah, we can clap for that. And we also want to note that it's not just in the research that we do, but we need to be using the material means that a lot of us have as academics to give back to our communities as well. Noting, of course, that we are in a cost of living crisis and that students in particular are struggling at the moment. We just wanted to use this opportunity to encourage people to donate to the Incarcerated Trans and Gender Diverse Community Fund. So you'll see that there's QR codes around, there's a QR code up there, there'll be more outside. So this fund supports trans people both in prison and post-release with things like medical expenses, bond and rental assistance, food and transport, and other things. We chose to spotlight this fund because it's highly relevant to queer justice, obviously. Trans people, and particularly trans women, are incarcerated at disproportionately high rates and face uniquely serious harms while in prison. And also this is a mutual aid fund, so that any money we give isn't going to overheads, it's going directly to community. One more thing that we should mention here is that as part of this commitment to caring for community, the food that we'll be eating this afternoon is catered by Palestinian Food Brisbane, which is a Palestinian catering company, and this is in recognition that queer justice cannot be separated from other forms of injustice like colonialism, and that it is particularly important right now to be supporting Palestinians in any way that we can. So if you would like their details for anything in the future, let us know. And with that, I will pass over to Lisa.
Thank you. I too would like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara people and the lands on which we are able to come and talk and present our work to you today. I'm Associate Professor Lisa Van Lent, one of the co-leads. We haven't settled on official names, but myself and Zara, Stardust, and Matt Ball as well. We kind of basically get together and try and clear as much of the university as we can, really. But technically, we are part of the Centre for Justice. Thank you, Sarah, for introducing us, and the Queer Research Group. So that's our home. We're a multidisciplinary team researching a range of topics related to diverse bodies, genders, and sexualities. I guess what we recognise is that many people continue to experience numerous injustices in education, health, law, criminal justice, among other contexts and disciplines. But there is an ongoing need for justice-driven research that enhances the lives and well-being of people in these communities. So through our innovative, we're going to call it innovative, and multidisciplinary research, members of the QUT Queer Research Group seek to drive social change and enhance justice. And today is really about supporting our early career and PhD students, HDR students, and early career, and we hope that you are inspired by learning about their research today. So, the first speaker, Dr. Tariq Shakar. How'd it go? I'll let Tariq say it much more beautifully than I can. But Tariq is a postdoc researcher dedicated to understanding and finding solutions for deep disagreements and political polarization. As a transmasculine from Brazil, he investigates the communicational features of political divisions that undermine the rights of political minorities, particularly within the Global South. In this presentation, Tariq will discuss how the rhetoric of political polarization strongly interacts with the attack on the rights of political minorities. Relevant literature and public discourse have argued that polarization is not actually the problem for political minority groups. Instead, other concepts and assumed deeper issues such as inequalities should be in focus. So contrary to this argument, Tariq will show how polarization undermines the discourse around social justice. Thanks, Tariq.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I was really thinking about what I would talk today in this lightning talk, which is just a few minutes. And I think the main thing that I thought about speaking is a summary of the main things that I'm worried about from the last in the last years, and also in the current projects that I'm doing at the moment. And these things are deep disagreements, polarization, and also justice to political minorities, and especially today, queer justice. How is polarizing discourse connected to queer justice? There are some arguments, both in the literature but also in public discourse, that polarization should not be the main focus of attention, because other problems are actually more important. For example, inequalities. I have heard this from friends before in Brazil, friends that are in social movements, for example, and also in the literature debate as well. I have seen this argumentation, both regarding political minorities, but also countries. So the problem for some countries should not be framed as polarization, but actually colonization or inequalities, poverty, and other issues. But is it that separate, polarization, is that separate from all these other issues? And the idea that I'm trying to argue is that no, it's not separate. And actually, it feeds into this broader inequality system. And how does it do that? Through two main processes that occur via the discourse: othering and the erasure of complexities. Othering is conceptualized as the tendency in the literature of polarization, for example, and other literatures on political discourse as well, the tendency to view the opposing group or camp as essentially different or alien to oneself. And I cannot think of a better example of a group that there are many, but one of the most important examples of groups that are framed as other, alien, or as someone that does an impossible metamorphosis, using Preciado words here, as a transgender community. So it's quite easy for some groups to frame the trans community as another in this sense, because the trans people, what they say to the political discourse is that it's possible to challenge the very one categorization that we are also born with. The first thing that happens in our lives when we are not born yet is someone saying what's your gender or sex. So when the trans community challenge this categorization, this very own categorization, that's where it becomes a group that is easy target for othering processes. And the second one is the erasure of complexities. And how does this happen? Because LGBTQI plus, the LGBTQI plus community, but in particular, calling attention to the trans community here, it's an easy target for that. It's important to come back to how the erasure of complexities occur. In polarization, polarizing discourse is actually, we can call it a lie, because it's not possible to categorize, as the transgender people say, it's not possible to categorize society and social groups into two categories. It's something that erases the complexity of the human beings. When a polarizing discourse from a politician or any social actor says that there is a us and a them, and when someone says that the only possibility for human existence is being a man or a woman, this is a lie, because we are all connected via multiple identities and categorizations. And how am I studying this? It's via the discourse of public actors in the public spheres and the network of publicists. The way I'm particularly studying this, I'll show an example here. I'll not read out loud, and I have a content warning here because it has discursive violence against the LGBTQI plus community, but I'll not read out loud. It's just, if you want to not read it, you are 100% able to not just read what is this. So this is a speech from Jair Bolsonaro, and it's a very good example of us versus them rhetoric. And the way I'm looking at this type of discourses is first trying to identify who are the entities, and entities here are groups, actors, or even non-human entities as well, that are mobilized through these discourses to form in and out groups, us and a them, and therefore erasing a complexity of society. So I'll give you a minute for you to read, but I'll call attention just to one term here that is used: this minority. So this minority is the other that is challenging our values, our Jair Bolsonaro's and his supporters' values, traditions, religion, and upbringing. Now, just to finalize them, these are the two main projects that I have been working with. First is looking at the discourses of political leaders and trying to map who are the entities that are being targeted by them. And the second one, trying to do a model that can are able to identify references to social and identity groups in discourse in a way that every researcher can use, even if the research is not using the researcher doesn't have a more like computational knowledge. This model will be easily adapted and can be used to any researcher that is looking at discourse in this sense. And what we do is that we identify the instances of entities in the discourse. We extract these instances and we assess how this entity is being framed in that discourse in terms of affiliation or position towards that entity. Oops. And just to mention here that the first project is on the political leaders, is trying to assess polarizing discourses, and the second one is trying to build a better model that is able to identify references to social groups in general, not only specific actors or organizations. And that's it. Thank you very much, and sorry for taking more time.
Thank you. Our second speaker is Celine. Celine is currently a PhD candidate with QUT's School of Justice. Prior to joining QUT, he was in Singapore's public service with experience in policing, prisons, and immigration. Currently, he's a sessional academic with QUT and has tutored for modules that focus on the Australian criminal justice system, supported by his supervisors, Dr. Laura Vitus, thank you, and Professor Matthew Ball. Celine is currently researching how the use of Telegram, an instant messaging application, is able to facilitate cruising practices in Singapore. So thanks, Celine.
my crutch, i.e. my phone. Okay, I've been told I have like 5 minutes, so I promise I won't run. Oh yay, clicker. We love it. Okay. Right. Can you hear me now? Oh, okay. Nobody has ever given me a mic before. I'm so nervous. This feels so much responsibility, right? Okay, so my name is Salihin. I'm with the School of Justice. I'm basically gonna give a brief overview of my research project, Unsettling Queer Spaces using Telegram to Cruise in Singapore. Oh wow, the clicker works. Okay. Okay, so just a brief overview of what the situation like is in Singapore. So basically, prior to 2023, homosexuality was actually illegal in Singapore. So this is criminalized under Section 377A of the Penal Code that criminalized acts of gross indecency between men. Now, the way in which this has been operationalized has been in tandem with public displays of arrests made by the police. This is the narrative that has been happening in Singapore in the 90s, labeling these activities as vice and basically clamping down on it. This has eventually led to the personification of gay people as perverts, and this was published in a broadsheet newspaper back in the 90s. Fast forward to today. We have since expanded the amount of queer spaces available in Singapore. We have an event similar to Pride called Pink Dot that we host yearly that brings together everyone and encourages equality for the LGBTQ plus community. We have a little bit tongue-in-cheek venues like Neo Conversion Clinic, which is a local bar in Singapore, and we also have bars and clubs that essentially hosts queer personas and drag shows and stuff like that. So it seems that the amount of queer spaces in Singapore has since expanded, and there is some progress. The problem with this,
Well, he hasn't come through a recruitment process, but he's been there like 8 years. Yeah, they're still dripping through.
Please mute if
Just
you're
to see what
online.
happens with these since that email's gone out from CBA though.
no one called me for going over 5 minutes.
You got the mic back.
Yeah. Oh, look.
What have I done?
That's me.
Am I back in the right spot?
Yeah. Okay.
The other one slide up in the corner as well.
Huh?
That's cool.
Okay, so back to where I was. Let me see. See, this is why notes are important. Okay, yes. Okay, so the previous slide, what that suggests is that, things are getting better, right, in Singapore. But the problem with this is that it masks the everyday queer practices or the everyday practices that queer people engage in. And the thing that I'm focusing on is the act of cruising, which is essentially engaging in sexual encounters in urban spaces. Now, these photos were not taken by me, but it was by a local photographer and artist, Jason Wee. This was part of his photo exhibition that documented cruising experiences in Singapore. Now, why is this important? Expanding on what Jason Luger and Loretta Lees was essentially talking about with regards to the Singaporean context, the problem of resistance is often it's tied to large-scale events like Pink Dot or the presence of queer venues and stuff like this, that it disregards the types of resistance that occurs in everyday lives. So the things that we do every day, like text each other about like, hey, do you want to go here? This is a way for us to actually engage with public spaces in a way that is not typically seen with regards to the queer community. So what Jason Luger and Loretta Lees was essentially talking about is that public spaces can also be reclaimed so long as you have an internet and a smartphone in today's day and age. So why is this important? And why am I exploring Telegram specifically? Telegram basically has all of these features that allow people to essentially have a greater sense of control over what is being published and what they post to each other. You have auto-deleted messages, and you also have invite links that people can access your group chats. If you don't want it to make it public, you can just do that. And you can also have view once media with content that expires after the person has viewed it. Although other instant messaging apps also offer these functions, Telegram is the one app that offers all of these things in like one app. So I was told that I have to give a call for action, right? Because it is apparently required for these types of things. So The main point I want to raise is when we think about all these everyday practices, how can we reconceptualize the idea of resistance with regards to the queer community and access to queer justice? And the other one would be, expanding on Diane Richardson's work, is how can we think about this outside of the realms and the perspectives of the global north? Is there any way that we can think about resistance in our everyday lives that we are engaging in that might not necessarily be in line with large-scale events like Pride and Pink Dot? So to give some, to sell my project a little bit. So there were a couple of academics in Iran who actually conducted a study on the use of Telegram, and they found that Telegram, given its security and safety, has allowed people or queer people in Iran to actually engage with one another, both online and offline, away from the view of the government and allowing them to actually engage with one another safely. They will also actually allow queer people to actually plan for get-togethers online first in order to gauge whether or not that meeting is going to be safe for them, and then eventually meet up with them offline. So there is some value to Telegram's features. I'm not over 5 minutes. No, okay. So the main point of this project is to basically think about ways in which gay people in Singapore can actually rethink the ability for them to exercise their sexual citizenship and imagine Singapore not only as just a place, but their place through the use of Telegram and digital placemaking and, cruising. Yes, that's it.
Thank you, Celine, and thank you for persisting through the beeping. I'm hoping that doesn't turn into an actual evacuation or anything.
To get it back up to where it was before. Sharing from this one. Why is that stuck?
Yeah.
Sharing PowerPoint.
We're just having a tech reset. While you're doing that, I'll introduce our next speaker, Ellen Bowe. Ellen is a PhD student of education at QUT. She's also worked as a sessional academic at ACU and is involved in religious education curriculum leadership and Catholic school governance with over 20 years' experience in the secondary classroom. Supported by her supervisors, me, and Professor Martin Mills, Ellen is researching Catholic secondary schools' responses to gender and sexuality diversity. Thanks, Ellen. Oh.
We can skip through. Do you want me to get through?
Sorry. There we go. Sorry, team.
Thank you, Lisa.
You sure I haven't thrown you?
No, I'm good. I'm going to bring these with me. Hi, everyone. When I was at school, when I was in year 11, one day I was in my library because I knew what the church had said about homosexuality, but I just couldn't understand it. I couldn't get my head around it. I didn't know why. So I went into my library and I got a book off the shelf called The Catechism of the Catholic Church. This is a book that presents a summary of Catholic teaching in a big list of thousands of little points, I suppose. And in that book that day, I read that the church considered homosexual acts to be disordered according to natural law, and that homosexual persons were therefore called to chastity. And I was a good kid and a high achiever, so this was big for me. I then drew a neat single diagonal line across those sections in that library book. I defaced the catechism. I was creating my own version of queer justice, my own baby version of queer justice. The Catholic Church is renowned for its centuries of discrimination based on gender and sexuality. However, queer justice is slowly taking form in some Catholic schools that are transforming the experience and affirming the gender and sexuality identities of children and young people and their teachers in their communities. Queer justice is becoming possible in Catholic schools, as some are extending their proclamations of love and justice for all. I've forgotten all about my PowerPoint straight away. That's my title slide. And that's where we're up to. So lots of Catholic education leaders are responding to diverse genders and sexualities using a range of strategies and a range of ways of being leaders. For example, some of them, many of them really, are affirming names and pronouns. They're providing for different kinds of partners at school events. They're arranging a whole lot of uniform options, bathroom and camp facilities that are appropriate. Some schools support the use of rainbow flag imagery on their campuses. Lots do not. Lots of them have days on which gender and sexuality diversity is celebrated. Many schools are facilitating assembly presentations from students and staff about gender and sexualities. Lots of schools are starting to foster allyship groups. Sometimes they are given euphemistic names, but in effect, they are allyship groups. And lots of schools are starting to acknowledge the marriages and babies of all staff. And this work is mandated by a growing number of bespoke statements that schools are generating themselves, policies and procedures that can come from the systems level, and even at a greater, umbrella level that the church is devising, that are designed to promote the safety of students and staff in these communities. So queer justice is being raised up. But how? Many school leaders are really passionate, really excited and proud about their work in this area, and they are motivated by, and in interviews that I'm undertaking with them, they are citing Catholic teachings related to human purpose, well-being and flourishing, Catholic and Christian values of love and inclusion and dignity, and broader notions of justice as well. And these teachings, these leaders are telling me, come from sacred texts. They talk to me about Pope Francis's words, and as well as these, key examples of an influence relied upon by school leaders is the top left image there, the Australian Catholic Bishops' Guide, Created and Loved, which has been described by leaders for queer justice in Catholic schools as armour and a weapon to provide equitable education experiences for their gender and sexuality diverse community members. This work in schools is happening, and yet, paradoxically, that catechism still contains those words I encountered in Year 11. That's reality. And those words influence the voices of Catholic conservatives who would have us believe that gender ideology, and sexuality diversity are things to fear. Ways of being that will destroy the fabric of our societies, things that must be excised from the church itself. And we're all too familiar with what those conservative voices have to say and the power that they wield when schools share this kind of practice. Dan mentioned at the very beginning that concept of being under siege, and that's the sense I certainly get when I read things like that. However, we're here to talk about queer justice, and discourses of love, flourishing, and that very justice are really powerful, and they're growing, and they can override the fear, the hatred, and the judgment. In Catholic schools, gender and sexuality diverse young people should be able to participate in education in parity with their peers. Gender and sexuality should not be a barrier to their participation and their flourishing, and schools are finding ways that queer justice can be seen and heard and align with Catholic beliefs and teachings. So queer justice is slowly taking shape in Catholic schools, but their lack of appetite to publicly or openly celebrate this work is preventing it from being fully achieved. That Year 11 student who made the little stand in the library in 1994 is now a teacher of Year 11s, many of whom are themselves seeking, questioning, and agitating to create their own versions of queer justice. And leaders in Catholic schools can create cultures of dignity for those students, their parents and their teachers, where the language of welcome, love, respect and justice can make Catholic schools places where queer community members feel valued and feel affirmed as the very image of God.
Thanks, Ellen. Okay, we'll get it right now. Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker, Dr. Ria Creato, is a researcher, educator and artist whose work explores the intersections of art, pedagogy and social justice. Ria's PhD research, informed by her time living and working in New York City, centered on supporting children as change makers. In 2023, Ria gave a TEDx talk where she reflected on her work in introducing LGBTIQA+ narratives within children's learning. After my own heart, Ria is. In this presentation, Ria shares her experiences working with young children at a museum in New York, in which parents and children had varied responses to LGBTIQA+ topics when they were introduced. But this informed Ria's PhD research and subsequently the creation of an amazing children's book aimed at contributing towards queer representation in children's learning. Over to you, Ria.
Hello. So before I tell you about how I ended up writing my first queer children's book, I'm going to have to take you back a few years. So in 2018, I was living and working in New York City. I had a job at the Children's Museum of Manhattan, where I was developing and facilitating all kinds of art workshops, usually for children around 5 to 10 years old. Now, being New York City, the museum that I worked at was very supportive about us hosting pride, queer-centered art workshops. In fact, they didn't just support it, they encouraged it, which was really awesome. And so my approach when developing these queer workshops was really to spotlight queer artists and then to invite young children to create artworks inspired by the artists that they were learning about. The children at these workshops always had to be accompanied by an adult. And as they were making art, I'd often use these opportunities to kickstart conversations on topics such as gender identity, diverse family structures, LGBTQ+ rights, so on and so forth. Now, I noticed something really interesting when I was working at this museum. We often hear that children are too young to learn about queer identities, right? Now, the overwhelming amount of research that we have available to us doesn't say this, but adults still do. Adults often tell us that children are too young or too innocent to understand queerness. What I found in my workshops was that children seem to have no trouble at all learning or understanding queerness. Some kids had questions, some had opinions, which was great. I always welcomed that. I always wanted to create space for the kids to ask and to discuss. But in all my time working with young children and talking to them about LGBTQ+ topics, I never had one negative experience. In contrast, my experience with the adults who accompany these children to the workshops was rather different. Now, that's not to say that all the adults that I met had negative responses. Some were empathetic and so happy that their children were learning about the queer community. But many adults made it very clear that they were uncomfortable with the topics being discussed. It was no secret that many of these adults found it challenging to make sense of gender identities and sexualities that existed outside the heteronormative structure. The children didn't necessarily have trouble understanding this, but the adults did. Many of these adults believed that these topics were better discussed at home. Some even went so far to believe that these topics were better reserved for older kids or only adults. And I realized very quickly that many of these adults believed myths and stereotypes about the queer community as fact. I also realized how easy it was for children to learn these ideas from the adults around them. And so when I began my PhD research, these varied and contrasting responses from children and adults was really what motivated me to amplify LGBTQ+ narratives as a means of dispelling myths and stereotypes. And so as part of my PhD creative research process, I wrote and illustrated this book right here. The book is titled, I Am So Very Truly Magnificently Happy. So, the premise of this book is centered around giving a voice to queer identities, particularly LGBTQ+ children and those belonging to queer families. From the secondary research I gathered through my PhD research, I understood that LGBTQ+ text, particularly for young children, were lacking. I was really motivated to ensure that queer children and children belonging to queer families saw themselves represented in the text they read. I also wanted to ensure that all children had opportunities to learn about the queer community. The book explores terms such as gender, identity, pronouns. It portrays diverse family structures, and it uses child-appropriate language to help young children better understand what it might mean to be trans, to be gay, to be non-binary. And so today, my call to action is to find a publisher so that I can hopefully get this book out there. Now more than ever, in a climate of banned books and constant complaints about LGBTQ+ literature, books such as this one are so necessary. In saying that, I also encourage all of you to go out there and share and amplify queer narratives with young children. Queer children absolutely deserve to grow up in a world without feeling like their identity needs to be hidden. Queer children deserve queer justice. Thank you.
Amazing. So please contact me. Everyone can find my details easily. If you can't find Ria, if you know a good publisher, and we can get that happening. Because I think that would be fabo. All right. Our fifth and final speaker, Dr. Zara Stardust, who is a scholar of sexual media interested in the discriminatory impacts of platform governance and content moderation on marginalised communities, especially the LGBTIQ+ people and sex workers. She's a chief investigator in the DMRC and a lecturer in the School of Communication. This presentation shares some preliminary findings from a study of targeted advertisements on Facebook made by the corporate sponsors of Sydney World Pride in 2023, collected through the ADM Plus S. I probably should have checked how to say that first. ADMS is Ad Observatory. It analyses them with reference to literature on rainbow washing, a mechanism by which corporations can publicly indicate progressive support for LGBTIQA+ communities while actively downplaying and obscuring their complicity in oppressive systems. Look forward to hearing from you. Thanks, Sarah.
Hello, Jingari in the Yugambeh language, where I am from, and thank you so much for having me here on unceded Yugara and Turrbal country. Today we're here for a panel on queer justice, and it would be remiss not to recognise that we're currently in a time of systemic and catastrophic injustice for millions of queer people here in so-called Australia and also around the world. Not only is there coordinated backlash against trans rights, disinformation about sex and gender diversity, but last year we've also become global witnesses to the first ever live-streamed genocide. And we're speaking today in the month of Pride here in Brisbane, which has become associated with progress, with diversity, with celebration. But as queer researchers, we kind of wanted to untangle this association and to problematize the myth that it will get better, and to question which queers matter during Pride. And Palestine has really been a turning point for many institutions, including QUT, to be held accountable for their financial investments in genocide. So on this theme of divestment, boycott and sanctions, I wanted to share some of the preliminary work that we've been doing at the DMRC about rainbow capitalism, analysing some of the ads of corporate sponsors during Sydney World Pride in 2023. And we can think about rainbow capitalism as a means of appropriating and profiting from LGBTIQA+ communities. It uses queer symbolism as a veil to disguise capitalist exploitation. It uses pinkwashing to indicate progressive support whilst making minimal effort towards structural change, and of course also obscuring corporations' complicity in oppressive systems. In 2023, Sydney hosted World Pride for the first time. It was an extravaganza. It had 400 events. There were over 1 million attendees from Australia and internationally, and there were over 30 corporations who were enlisted as official sponsors for the festival, many of whom used queer slogans in their imagery and their marketing. So Amazon branded itself as Glamazon, Zambrero became Glambrero, L'Oreal had a yassification station. And we've had an opportunity to study some of these ads through the ADMS Australian Ad Observatory. And this is a database that allows research to analyse ads that would not otherwise be observable. So that it captures ads that have been donated by 2,000 users' personal Facebook feeds. And we searched for ads that related to World Pride during the 2-week festival season. And then we distilled them into a database of just over 100 unique images that related to the Pride events. The key messages from the ads were around individual self-expression, inclusivity, love, allyship. So the American Express slogan was "Express yourself." Coles said, "Everybody is welcome at our table." Qantas announced "Love is in the air." And Optus believed pride starts with yes. And according to the logic of a lot of the ads we saw, the messaging was pride is about expressing oneself through consumption. Corporations are positioned as allies to queer communities. Love can overcome bias because queerphobia is only a matter of individual prejudice. And as you can imagine, the images were quite sanitized, pretty family friendly. There was a lot of rainbow, sequins, glitter, a lot of references to summer fruits and spices, to flavors and tastes, to images of celebrities and drag queens and musicians. There were customized cocktails. There was limited edition lubricants. And then when we extracted the keywords from the ads and then compared them against a taxonomy of industries to kind of take a look at what type of products the sponsors were actually selling, you can see here they were largely events and performances, travel and tourism, alcohol, dieting and weight loss, weapons and ammunitions. While the imagined queer consumer here is affluent, urban, mobile, someone with buying power, the research into the social situation for LGBTIQA+ folks in Australia is much more dire. So people are at increased risk of lifetime alcohol-related health issues. This is compounded by barriers to employment and workplace discrimination. Queer communities are overrepresented in the homelessness population with a lack of housing stability. And while targets for tourism, travel is very dangerous for many trans and intersex people due to surveillance technology like body and luggage scanners or facial recognition software. Western LGBT tourism is directly assisting in pinkwashing the Zionist regime. One of the sponsors of Sydney World Pride, Booking.com, is facing criminal charges for money laundering from illegal Israeli settlements. And of course, you would have seen too that Google has fired their staff for protesting their cloud contract with Israel. If you want to read more about the relationships between settler occupation and genocide in so-called Australia and Palestine, I really recommend the publications that are coming out released by the Institute for Collaborative Race Research. In our preliminary analysis of this project, we've found a real web of complicity that implicates many of the sponsors through their parent companies, their subsidiaries, their board members who are investing in genocide in different ways. And there's been sustained community movement to remove police and corporations from Mardi Gras for a long time. So our next step on the project is to expand our data set a little further and think about how queer communities are being identified by social media, given that targeted or predatory advertising is no longer permitted. So we're interested in what kind of proxies are being used to attract these imagined audiences and communities. Thank you.
You're amazing. Okay. Next, while our 5 presenters make their way to turn themselves into a panel, can we please give all the presenters another round of applause? Thank you.